The results were as expected, actually. So the winning was the National Liberation Front, the FLN, the regime's party. And to avoid any hegemonic posture within the FLN and adjust the balance of power, a full victory of the FLN was not possible, and it would have been too obvious. And so what the regime did is that it gave, and I think this is the right word, it gave approximately 105 seats to the FLN, followed by the main Islamist party, the MSP, the Movement for Society and Peace, and within a third position there was the National Rally for Democracy, the RND. In Algeria, participation in election by the so-called opposition parties has come to mean co-optation. This is how the regime actually co-opt political parties in legislative elections, but also in local elections by offering them seats, but also ministerial position. So result of local and legislative elections, not the presidential, because usually the presidential results are set in advance, enlighten us on the relationship of the political parties with the regime. Today one can say safely, for instance, that the MSP is clearly in the regime's good books. Those independent parties that won seats, few seats here and there, I think their very existence is really a big victory in such a closed political regime and political game. As for the participation rate, as expected, it was very low. I think it barely reached 30%, but here again, the Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune said it in a speech. He said, "For me, the turnout doesn't matter. What matters to me is that those for whom the people vote have sufficient legitimacy." And here again, we ask ourselves about the legitimacy of this system, of this pouvoir, of this regime, of this president. I think President Tebboune has a deep crisis of legitimacy today. There is a crisis of legitimacy in Algeria, and these kind of masquerades, I want to say, of these set up and staged elections are not going to help the situation. They are not going to solve this crisis of legitimacy. On the opposite, it is deepening the crisis and giving Algerians a feeling of déjà vu with the two latest mandates of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. I think really nothing really changed. The new Algeria, between quotes, is the same as the old Algeria. We are still in a regime where there is a civilian facade, and behind this civilian facade there is the military high command, or I should say some generals within the army that are really not governing but ruling Algeria. The military's high command with its intelligence branch and the presidency are removing and have been removing undesirable individuals to prevent internal conflicts within the institution. This has been going for the last year, where we've seen a lot of reshuffling within the military institution, but also the gendarmerie and in general the security apparatuses. By ousting these people, the military is trying to put in an end and avoid the resurgence of internal conflict within the institution. And I think the military are trying to secure Tebboune's political survival, given that the Hirak wants a change of leadership, and with a deteriorating economic situation due to a crash in oil crisis, but also to the pandemic that has been dragging on. There isn't that much option for the regime. So what the military are trying to do is to again secure Tebboune's political survival. this of course poses the question of the options, but also the question of repression. The Algerian regime, like many regimes in the region, have been working with the carrot and the stick. When the economic situation was good enough and it had a pretty comfortable financial cushion, the regime has used generous handouts. But again, today the carrot is going to be difficult to use because of a deteriorating economic situation, and what is left is the option of repression. And today there is within the regime an entire sophisticated repertoire of repression. While in the 90s the regime used to have recourse immediately to ballistic and heavy-handed repression. Let us remember here that the first thing that they did in the 90s was the opening of 7 camps in the desert to put in there 40,000 militant of the Islamic Salvation Front. Some of these have nothing to do with the Islamic movement, but this is to show that there is a learning curve here. Today they didn't use the same mode and repertoire of action. Today one can see that there is an adaptation, if I may say, and also, if I may say, a learning curve. They use the law and the judiciary with a plethora of vague and elastic laws to arrest people, to jail activists, but also academics, activists, hierarchists, lawyers, and so on and so forth. They marshal also other security forces to protect the national reputation of the army, but also their internal cohesion. And this is why we've seen the marshalling of other security forces, naming here the police. Depending on the situation, the regime did not use a single mode of response to protest. In 2019, for instance, the regime used mixed mode of repression, switching between attrition, which is just waiting for the demonstration to end, tolerance, and also concession. So again, this is a regime that has been highly adaptive and resilient and has been using a different repertoire of repression.